we did a lot on heart rate and breathing. The first week was more on how the autonomic nervous system works in general. So today, we're now going to move into the EEG, okay? But before doing that, I want to just check, does anybody have any questions over the last couple weeks that you would like me to address? I'm going to give you a second to go ahead and use the chat window, which if you go to your toolbar, you can use chat there. I'll actually initiate the chat. You can either through audio ask a question, or if you want to chat it. So let's just take a minute or two to do that, okay? Hopefully you guys are reading some of the different things that we have out there. I strongly recommend, we talked about it a few weeks ago, but Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Super, super important book to read. We've got some of the different videos going on. So for today though, we're gonna look at electrical current and how the EEG works. So if you guys remember from before in our other meetings, we've talked about this. We're going to do this for review, okay, is that we're this massive power plant, okay? We're making electrical activity. I know we revisit this all the time, but it's so important, okay? It's how are we making the electrical current, and then how are we managing it? So important. So when we look at the EEG, you need to look at it from two aspects, okay? You need to look at it diagnostically. So the diagnostics would have a lot to do with the making of the electrical current. And when we're making that, diagnostically, we're looking at what it is that, how the electrical activity is distributed. One second. So on the diagnostic side, you're really just measuring the electricity that's coming out. Then on the intervention side, we're working with changing the electrical current, okay? So there's a couple different ways that we can change it. So we've looked at this before, but the nervous system, the way that it works is it has a couple different branches. It has the central nervous system, and then it has the autonomic nervous system, okay? Or the peripheral nervous system, and a subset is the autonomic nervous system. So we first diagnostically with the EEG see where the EEG is. Is it sitting in a state where the EEG is going too fast, or whether it's going too slow, or if it's in an ideal state in the middle. And many times when we're doing that, we're looking at whether it's in a parasympathetic state or whether it's in a sympathetic state. And the main brain waves that we're looking at are the theta waves and the high beta waves and their relationship to each other. So with this principle under you know, the at the base is that we need to be looking at the speed of that, and the primary brain waves that are associated with going slow are the theta waves, and the ones that are going fast are the high beta waves, okay? Now let me switch out here. Okay, so we're gonna use this whiteboard. Okay, so an EEG typically, when you look at an EEG, you'll see something that looks like this, okay? Hopefully you guys have seen something like that. It looks a little bit different than the heart rate or the QRS, which in a heart, you kind of go like this, and then you have a big peak, and then it goes like this, and then a peak. You guys remember when we talked about this? Okay, that's more of a heart. And then the EEG is all of this up and down of this electrical current, and it's not as rhythmic as you see in the QRS with the heart, okay? So as we look at this EEG, okay, that's doing all this up and down, okay? Question is, well, what is all of this? Okay, well, it's electrical current, but inside of it are all these different speeds or brain waves. So I want you to try to think of it this way. So we've got a slow wave, okay, which, let's start at the beginning. So delta are the slowest waves possible, okay? And a delta wave, I'll type it here. Delta goes from 0 to 4 hertz, okay? So that means 0 to 4 hertz, there's 4 delta waves, okay? And there's a 1 hertz delta wave, a 2 hertz, a 3 hertz, and a 4 hertz. Okay, those are 4 delta waves. So in these delta waves, what that means is in 1 second, it does, in a 1 hertz delta wave, it does 1 sine wave in a second. Okay, so that would be a 1 hertz or 1 sine wave in a second, which is referred to a delta wave. Okay, also included in delta is a 2 hertz. So it has 1 and 2 sine waves in 1 second. That would be a 2. Okay, this is a 1. And then also in delta is a 3 sine wave. Okay, so in 1 second, it does 3 sine waves. And then the last one is 4, which does 4 sine waves in 1 second. Those are speeds, okay? Then the next set of brain waves, okay, so you got your deltas, which are super, super slow. If I ask where that would happen, hopefully you would say, well, that would happen in sleep, okay? Because your brain can't turn all the way off. So what it does is it drops into delta waves as a way to, and you've heard of delta wave sleep, and that's when the brain is cycling super, super slow, okay? Those are the delta waves. The next set of brain waves, okay, are called the theta waves. And you've heard us talk about theta before. Theta waves, those cycle 4 to 8 hertz, okay? And a hertz is just the cycling of the brainwave, okay? So we did 1, 2, 3, and 4, just for the sake of our time. We're not gonna go through every one of these each time. But what this means is the 5 theta wave does 5 sine waves in a second. And then the 8, and then we've got 5, 6, 7, and 8 hertz, okay? And that, the 8th one, we won't do 6 and 7. The 8th one does what? It cycles 8 times in 1 second. And those are all called theta waves. And they're all at different speeds. So imagine like a speedometer. This one, first one's going 1 miles an hour, 2 miles an hour, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 miles an hour. So they're going faster as we're going up the spectrum, okay? Then the next one after theta is going to be the alpha waves, okay? And alpha waves cycle at 8 to 12 hertz, okay? And just like we did before, that means that it's going to do 8 sine waves in a second, or 9 sine waves in a second, 10 sine waves in a second, and then the highest alpha wave that exists is going to do 12 cycles in 1 second, okay? Now, we're going to stop there for a second because all of these brain waves, 0 to 12, are all slow brain waves, so that therefore they are parasympathetic. They're what slow me down, okay? I talked to you about deltas when we go to sleep. It goes way down, okay? Theta, those happen while I'm awake, okay? So when I'm awake, and they can also happen when I sleep, but when I'm awake, my brain isn't continuously on, okay? It's actually having like micro pauses that happen. So if I looked at my brain over 10 seconds, okay? So 0 to 10 seconds, okay? We would think naturally, well, my brain is completely alert for those 10 seconds. But in reality, it's not, okay? What happens about every 3 seconds is I get a little burst of a theta wave, okay? A little burst of a theta wave, and then let's say at second 9, I get a little burst burst of a theta wave, which is like a brake pedal, okay? So just think about when you're driving. Do you always just push the accelerator? No, you have to use the accelerator and the brake pedal, okay? In your brain, your brake pedal is your theta. And what that does is it's just naturally, every few seconds, I have a micro pause of a little burst of a slow wave. But it happens so fast that I'm not even aware of it. So everything seems continuous to me, but it's really, reality is broken up by little micro pauses of theta. And in the normal brain, that happens about every 3 seconds, okay? So that happens in a normal brain, but in a brain that has a hard time focusing, where it's hard for it to pay attention, what do you think is happening there in that brainwave, in that brain? What's happening in that brain is, instead of a micropause every few seconds, every 3 seconds, is these micropause, or these theta waves, are actually happening every 2 seconds, maybe every second, okay? And those create problems for the brain. 1 second. So in a brain that can't focus, instead of these micropauses happening every 3 seconds, they now have these theta waves that are happening more frequently, okay? And then what that does is that impacts the person's ability to focus, because they've stepped on the brake pedal so much. Imagine that if you were driving. You know, normally to maintain 60 miles an hour, you step on the brake pedal every 5 seconds. But now I have you stepping on the brake every 2 seconds. You won't be able to maintain 60 miles an hour. You'll now be going slower. Well, this is what happens in the brain of an ADHD person, is they get too many of these micro pauses of thetas, and consequently their attention gets compromised. So from a chemical way to address this, I want to get rid of those. So how might I get rid of that? A good way to get rid of thetas, because they're slow, is to give the brain something that will make it go faster, okay? Hence the introduction of amphetamines or caffeine. So if I introduce a variant of something that will speed up the brain, a variant of, you know, literally speed, a form of amphetamine. So in this case, if I introduce Adderall, okay, I introduce Adderall into the system, what it does is it speeds up the brain and decreases the number of theta activity. So now, instead of the brain pausing every 3 seconds or every second, it's now pausing in a way that is less of these pauses, because I've introduced a stimulant to speed up the activity in the brain. So the reason we're always looking at the thetas is that lets us know how well the brain is focusing. The problem with getting rid of too much theta is now the brain's not resting enough. So as we work with you guys in understanding how to work with the program, we will be wanting you to focus on the volume of how much theta is in the brain, okay? So when we're looking at that, theta, we want it to be not too much. So the marker for theta is 2.3, okay? And the marker where there's too much theta in that is when it crosses the line of 3.0. So now I have so many of these theta bursts that it's hard for me to focus and I go into distraction. But also on the flip side, if I break below about a 1.8 on theta, now my brain is not resting enough, so it's in a state of fatigue, okay? When we're talking about that, what we're talking about is there's too many bursts of those slow waves that are having this happen, and there's too few of them, which is making this happen. Hopefully that makes sense to you, okay? So we now have, let's go through what we've got. We've got our slow waves, okay? And under our slow waves, we've got our deltas, we've got our thetas, and we've got our alphas, okay? These are all, just for review, the thetas are 0 to, or deltas are 0 to 4. Thetas are 4 to 8. And alphas are 8 to 12, okay? Those are all slow parasympathetic brain waves, and I now want to talk a little bit about alpha. Alpha is super important. So when I look at an alpha wave, okay, it's not a slow theta wave, which is 1 cycle in a second, right? But it's in 1 second, I'm getting somewhere to 8 to 12 of these sine waves, okay, in a second, and that is an alpha wave. Because it's going slightly faster, the alphas can actually start to engage in some type of thought process. Below 8, there's really nothing that's going on that's actually constructive in the brain except for resting. It's not thinking about something. It can't solve math. It can't come up with an idea when it's going that slow. It's just recovering. But the interesting thing about the alphas is there's actually something that happens in alphas, okay? And that is when our brain starts to come up with new ideas, okay? So alpha, we would break into 2 parts, okay? And the 2 parts for alpha would be low alpha, and by low alpha, we're talking about the low frequencies of alpha. So that would be 8 to 10, okay? And then we've got what's called high alpha. We're not talking about the amplitude or the height of the brainwave. We're talking about its frequency, which would be 10 to 12, okay? So what happens in these, 1 second, I'm emitting somebody. Okay, in low alpha, I'm coming up with ideas, but these are more like imagination. Okay, they're not really constructive ideas, they're just random thoughts. So a good way to, like a daydreaming, or like if I said, oh, it'd be cool to have a McDonald's on Mars. Like, okay, yeah, that's an idea, but it's not really very constructive. And the reason it isn't constructive is it really doesn't have enough energy in it to really connect it to reality, but it is an idea. It's just a random passing of a thought or an idea, okay? High alpha, on the other hand, because it's starting to go a little bit faster, has real creativity and innovation in it, okay? This is where the brain starts to do the really disruptive things where it comes up with a new idea. Okay, when the iPhone was discovered or thought of by Steve Jobs, he was in alpha. Okay, when Tesla came up with the Tesla coil, he was in alpha. Okay, when a great poem was written, the person was in alpha. All the great music that we love today, the person was in alpha. Okay, their brain was in a state where it was creating something new. And the reason why they weren't in other states is because the moment I break over 12, now I'm starting to be more productive and a little bit more connected directly with reality. And in order to come up with a new idea, I have to disconnect from reality for a second. Like, it's hard to come up with a new idea while I'm talking right now because I'm implementing a task. But if I stop talking and close my eyes and start to think about something, I might get a new idea, and that new idea would come out of a slowing down of my brain. So this is the reason why people talk about getting in writer's block, or they're stuck on something. It's because their brain is running so fast that they can't drop down into those low speeds. This is another reason why you get new ideas like right before you fall asleep or right when you wake up in the morning. It's because you're having that, you're passing through that alpha state and a new idea is happening. So let me give you a little example of in history how this was used by a famous inventor. So Thomas Edison used to engage in this task where what he would do is he would hold two steel ball bearings in his hands, and he would go take a nap. And what would happen is, as he's falling asleep, the hands would let go of those ball bearings and they'd hit the ground really hard, and it would wake him up. And when he woke himself up, what he would instantaneously do is write down every thought that was in his head. And those thoughts would be high volume at first, one after another. But then they would become less and less and less as he became more awake. Well, what did Edison figure out? He figured out that when he's sleeping, as he comes out of sleep into reality, he passes through alpha. And that's where all the ideas would come from. And we'll notice that. You'll notice that sometimes, like if you're taking a shower or something like that, and you're just kind of disconnected from everything, all of a sudden you come up with this idea. And that's coming because you're passing through alpha. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Let's go ahead and we talked about the slow waves, the alphas, the thetas, and the deltas. Now we're going to talk about the perfect brain waves, which are called SMR. Okay? So let's go ahead and now we're going to talk about SMR and what's called low beta. Okay? So SMR is a speed of electrical current that goes between 12 to 16. Okay, now some people might say 13 to 15, some people might say 12 to 15, some people might say 12 to 16. For the purpose of what we're working with, we're gonna put the range at 12 to 16. Low beta is 16 to 20, okay? This area, and when the brain is in this area, this is what you are aware of as what people refer to as the zone. It's a very high productive state. Some people refer to it as flow state. Okay. This is where the brain is in a perfect speed that it can accomplish many, many, many tasks. So let's just for review, we know that 12 hertz would be, so an alpha, 12 sine waves in a second. So then an SMR, if it was a 13, okay, in 1 second, the brainwave would be cycling 13 times, okay, up and down for that second. A low beta, the brain is now cycling 17 times in a second, okay, it's going really, really fast, okay, well, not super fast yet, but it's doing that all the way for 1 second. It's doing those sine waves over and over again, okay, faster. The real engagement of thought occurs right around 12 hertz, okay? Then up to 20, we're gonna have the zone and flow states, but the ideal spot for that is 12 to 16. Now what you've noticed, should have noticed so far, is that a lot of these brainwaves are Greek letters of the alphabet, right? You notice that? Delta, theta, alpha, beta, right? But you see that SMR is different, okay? It's not a Greek letter of the alphabet, okay? It is, the reason for that is it wasn't discovered until the early 70s, and all these other brainwaves were discovered in around 1920, 1930. And guess what brainwave was discovered first? Would make sense, right? Alpha. So the first brainwave that was ever seen on an EEG by Hans Berger was an alpha wave, an 8 to 12 hertz wave. Okay, he saw that and he identified that on the EEG as alpha. And guess what? The second set of brainwaves, betas, those are the second ones. Okay, and you'll go through the ones and you'll see that they kind of fall alphabetically in the Greek alphabet. Now, SMR was not discovered until later. It actually was seen originally as a the main category was betas. So anything over 12 was considered betas. But a neurologist at UCLA found in the early 70s a unique set of brainwaves in the brain that he entitled as SMR, or sensory motor rhythm. We're going to finish with this story about this so that you kind of understand how this came about. And we're going to talk more about this next time we get together and start to work our way up into the stress brainwaves over here, which are the high betas. We're going to do that next week, okay? But let's finish with this story. So in the late 60s, early 70s, a guy by the name of Dr. Stearman at UCLA was neurologist working with brainwave activity. He knew about alphas, he knew about deltas and thetas and betas. And he was doing some animal studies. And he had this, wanted to see what was going on, particularly in cats, when they were in a very calm but focused state. So he noticed that, the cat, when it was just kind of sitting around, it was kind of normal. But when it was hunting, when it was looking for something, it almost developed a different cognitive mental state than when it was just kind of laying around the house, which if you've ever seen a cat or you've seen videos of big cats, right? When they're hunting, they look a little bit different than when they're sleeping on the couch, right? So he's like, what's going on in their brain? He goes, I know what's going on when they're sleeping. They're in deltas and thetas. They're not anxious. Like they're not like the golden retriever bouncing around the house. They're in a different kind of state that's very calm but focused. And so he put it, actually had EEGs embedded into the heads of these cats. And he studied them, and he found that every time they went into a hunting mode, their brain dropped into a specific frequency. It wasn't just anything higher than 12 hertz. So it wasn't 12 to 32 hertz. But it always, when they hunted, they went into 12 to 16. And they wouldn't go faster or slower. They would stay right in this 12 to 16 mode. And he noticed that they were very productive when they were in that 12 to 16. Could they also produce when they were in 20? Yes, but they weren't as accurate. And they weren't as precise as 12 to 16. So he started to identify that mode as called sensory motor rhythm, meaning the whole body is kind of aware of itself. And it's in this perfect rhythm of calm and focus. What we know of in sports as that zone spot where the guy can't miss the putt. You don't miss, you make all the free throws. You're like in this perfect spot. That was what Stearman identified as SMR. So not only did he identify it, but he then wondered, could I make the brain make more of that? Okay. Now, normally in our healthcare system, we're thinking, well, the only way to change the brainwave activity is chemical. Is I can change the speeds, like we talked about earlier with Adderall, by adding chemicals in. But he was wondering, could I actually teach the brain of these cats to make more SMR? Could they make more SMR if I engage them in a learning process? Okay. So you're coming off of, around this time period, a lot of work that B.F. Skinner had done with animal studies in the 50s and the 60s. So this guy is thinking, well, if B.F. Skinner can teach a mouse to run through a maze, okay, or a pigeon to peck letters and spell out the word dog with its nose, okay, with its beak, maybe I could teach these cats to make more SMR. So he developed an experiment where he put them in a cage where the EEG, the electrical activity, was connected directly to a device that distributed milk and food. And whenever the EEG would drop into 12 to 16 hertz, the device would release food. So he started to reward them every time their brain dropped into 12 to 16 hertz. And then he started to look at the baseline of how much SMR did they have over a certain period of time. And what he noticed was, which you can imagine, is the cats that he was giving reward to for every time they went into 12 to 16, compared to the cats that weren't getting reward, the cats that were getting rewards started making more SMR over longer periods of time because they were learning something new, just like we learn anything else. They were actually producing more SMR. And then you would pair that with a signal, like a light or a sound, just like think of Pavlov in the late 1800s. He started pairing stimulus so that with that light, the cat would make more SMR, not just when it was hunting, but when it would see that light or hear that sound, it would make SMR. So it was literally causing the brains of these cats to make more of this electrical current, which was an ideal state in the brain, okay? So we know that's done. What you're doing today in your centers with every client is you're applying the exact same principle with neurofeedback, is you're changing brainwave activity with operant conditioning. You're just not feeding them M&Ms or milk. You're feeding them something they want to engage in, like a video task. So let's go forward, fast forward just a couple years for Stearman, and then we'll finish this discussion. So Stearman's study of identifying SMR and making more SMR, he kind of finished that, shelved it, moved on. And he was such an expert in neurology and seizure activity in humans that he actually was called to NASA to work on a chemical that was a rocket fuel, part of a rocket fuel that was causing astronauts to have seizures. Now this is late 60s, so big space race, everything. And they found this great rocket fuel that was fantastic for the rockets, but every time people around it, they would have seizure activity. So this guy is a neurologist, is an expert in seizures. They say, can you please come experiment this because we'd like to use this rocket fuel, but it's causing these problems. So he goes out to NASA from California. I think it was down in Houston, and goes there and brings all of his cats with him and starts exposing them to the rocket fuel. So he has a subset of about 80 cats, exposes them to the rocket fuel, and something very interesting happens, okay? Is with these 80 cats, he exposes them to rocket fuel, and 40 of them have seizures, and then 40 don't. Isn't that interesting? So he gives the 80 cats, exposes them to the same fuel, 40 have seizures, 4 don't. So he starts to think about this and say, well, genetically, maybe they're wired differently. Age, starts to do all, work through all of his, history of these cats and starts to try to figure out what is the common thing. Is it males, females, second generation, third? What is causing this, right? Why? And he literally goes weeks and he can't figure out why do some have seizures and others don't. So he's about ready to just like pull out his hair on this. And all of a sudden he thinks about, wait a minute, what about the SMR study? He just randomly, he did not do this on purpose. Which of these cats were involved in the study where I made them more SMR? You remember we talked about that earlier? Like he took a subset of cats and he fed them every time they made more SMR, and the other ones he didn't, and he found out that he could actually make more sensory motor rhythm in their brain. And he started to put 2 and 2 together, and what he found out was to the cat, the one that had been in the no SMR study versus the one that had been fed every time they made SMR, that to the cat, they didn't have seizures. And this was the beginning of neurofeedback. This was really when it started to apply to actually changing things in people. Because he immediately after this went back to UCLA and started the initial work at neurofeedback for epilepsy and seizure disorders. And within a few months, he had his first subset of humans that he actually decreased their prevalence of epilepsy or seizures by producing SMR in the brain. really was the beginning of everything that we're doing. So I know we work on ADHD and sleep and anxiety and depression, but where it all started was epilepsy and seizures. And it started with the study. Now, there is a wonderful book that's a super easy read. Super easy read. I really strongly recommend that everybody listening reads this book, Symphony in the Brain. And it is fantastic talking about how this all happened and how it works into how we can use it today in a way to treat many, many illnesses out there. To finish up, I mentioned earlier when we started that an EEG is this choppiness that we see, right? Well, all that EEG is a combination of all of these brainwaves brought together into one electrical signal, okay? And what we're doing with the quantitative analysis that we do, the QEEG, is we're taking all of those signals and we're separating them out so that you can actually read them and measure them. But that signal that you see is the final product of everything coming together: thetas, alphas, deltas, and SMRs and betas. Next week, we're going to talk more about that. Okay, guys, it's great having you on. Anybody have a question? If you want to chat or ask me via audio. Sorry we had a little bumpy start there. I was just coming out of another meeting. But hopefully a lot of this made sense. Any questions? You can do chat window. I got a Julie with her hand raised. Okay. So, and let me see the chat. Oh, look at this. I missed some chat things. Does the executive functioning rational thought occur in an alpha state? That was from Bridget. I see you asked me twice because I missed it. It actually, the more the executive productive states are occurring in high betas. Now, if you were to come up with a creative idea about something practical, that would happen out of the alpha. So let's say I do math a certain way in my head. That is going to be more of 12 hertz and higher. But if I think of a more creative way, like, oh, what about if I did it this way? That idea of doing it a different way is going to come out of alpha. Okay, I think we're good there. Julie, did you want to ask that afterwards, or? Oh, you said thank you. Okay, all good. Great. Guys, great job. Again, we're going to unpack some really significant information here the next few weeks. It's not only going to help you in your clinics, or if you're working, or if you're a client out there that's signed on, or wherever you are, but it's really going to create a base that helps you understand a lot of things that are going on in the human body and brain. Thanks for all your time today, and look forward to seeing you next week, where we're going to learn more about the electrical activity in the brain. Okay? We'll see y'all.